are those three commands? Well, you can see one of them. Tell me one of them. We'll try to get all three of them here. I think there should almost be a fourth one, but we'll get at least the three that I think are the clearest here. Stephanie, what's one of them? Trust in the Lord, okay? Fear, Tom, okay. Mariah? Honor the Lord, okay. Those are the three there. The one that I would maybe want to add, but it wasn't in some of the commentaries, so I don't want to be too uppity and add mine to that. But I think acknowledge has to deal with knowing God. In all your ways, acknowledge Him. So I think that could fall at least as maybe in a subcategory there. But so we have at least trust the Lord, fear the Lord, and honor the Lord. And then again, as an addendum, acknowledge Him in all the things you do. With just this kind of outline or kind of, outline of these verses, does this impact or influence the way that you see or read these verses or how you hear what is being said? And if so, let's talk about it. But to maybe get that impression, let's read it again. Read those same 6 verses again. And now with seeing that kind of the 3 commands, trust the Lord, fear the Lord, and honor the Lord in there, let's kind of read it again and see if that helps anything to stand out a little more. And I want 2 new volunteers to read some of the verses here. Elizabeth, if you'd read verses 5, 6, and 7. And then someone else. Okay, Isaiah in the back there. I'll be, all right. So we'll have Elizabeth, we'll read Proverbs 3, 5, 6, and 7. And Isaiah 8, 9, and 10. And you do have to stand up. Isaiah's up now, 8, 9, and 10. Thank you, Elizabeth.
It will be healing to your body and refreshment to your bones. Honor the Lord from your wealth and from the fruit of all your produce. So your barns will be filled with plenty, and your vats will overflow with new wine.
Thank you, Isaiah. Well done, you two. Now, was there any benefit as we read through this, or as you read through this a second time now, having seen those 3 commands, did that help to bring anything out or make anything stand out better, clearer, make this whole unit seem, more of a unit than it maybe would have done before? And any benefit to seeing that as you read through this a second time? I think one of the benefits for me as I read through it is you see it more as a middle unit of chapter 3. There's these 3 similar types of encouragements here that kind of bind again along with some of the subject matter, but binds these verses together into one larger encouragement there. So, any other thoughts on that? So let's start here at verse 5. What's being compared and contrasted in Proverbs 3, verse 5? There's a lot that's being compared and contrasted here. What are some things that are in view here that Solomon is trying to bring out? Some comparing and contrasting. What's one of the things? Stephanie.
Our own understanding is not sufficient.
Okay. Anybody else? We have, if we want to put some contrasts here, trusting in the Lord is contrasted with trusting in your own understanding. Trusting in God, trusting in you. And trusting in the Lord, I should say, with all of one's heart, with all of one's affections, all of one's, with everything, is being contrasted with this idea of even leaning on your own understanding. Now, I guess the question I have here too is, does this verse bring out a picture even of how it says we're to trust God with all of our hearts? We see that as a totality there. But is there anything that kind of in the second half of that verse relates to the size or degree of our understanding, that like maybe there's a contrast there? In other words, is there a contrast between trusting in God with all of our heart with trusting what, or leaning on what? Our own understanding. The idea is maybe even a partial leaning. Don't lean. Don't even partially support yourself with your own understanding. Trust in the Lord fully. I think we have a full versus a full trust in God, even contrasted to a even partial or hesitating trusting in yourself. Here's a quote here from the book of from one of the commentaries. Proverbs characterizes wise living by faith entirely, that is, with all your heart, exclusively, in other words, do not lean on your own understandings, and exhaustively, in all your ways, acknowledge him. So we have this picture here of an entire exclusive and exhaustive faith resting upon God that is being commended here, that I think is important to note there. Okay? So here's a question. If the heart is the center of all a person's emotional, intellectual, religious, moral activity, that is to say, it is the center of all that you are. I think one of the commentaries said it controls all the body, from the facial expressions to the tongue to all of your limbs and everything. It is the control center of your body. If the heart is the center of all of your activity, what does it mean to trust in the Lord with all of your heart? And what might that look like? What are how can we say that differently, synonymously? Any thoughts?
With our whole being, with everything that we have, in every aspect of our lives, he is to be foremost. His ways, our ways, his thoughts, our thoughts.
Okay. Anybody else?
I may have heard of an example of comparing this to a house where you need to allow the Lord in every room of the house and not have closets that you partition off with hidden sin or other ways that you're not obedient to the Lord.
That's good. When he dwells, he must dwell in all of our hearts, and we must trust him with all of our heart. Does this bring up maybe any kind of, does it tickle the mind in another maybe Bible verse or a command of God that maybe does this kind of tickle a connection in your minds there when trust the Lord with all your heart? If the heart, again, is the nerve center, the control center of the entire being. The Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. I think this is an echo. This is a statement in the wisdom literature of the same thing. Again, if you want to think about just kind of the functions of the not anthropomorphic, but the maybe anthropomorphic is the right word, but the eyes are meant to see and ears are to hear. The heart is meant to discern and prompt action. In other words, the heart is the controlling. It is what weighs and the balances and then guides. What does Christ say? Out of the heart proceeds all the words, all the actions. Everything comes from the heart. And so, again, this is it's easy in modern culture to think of heart as an emotional kind of feeling, and there's nothing wrong with feeling emotional affection, warm affection for God. That ought to be there, and it can grow as you're in Christ. But that is not the beginning point or the focus point. It rather, I believe, those kinds of warm emotions that we would, in our culture, connected with, come after this fidelity of obedience and of allegiance in all ways. You know, maybe this is a really bad example, but I'm going to use it anyway. Oftentimes, well, when people are dating, first kind of dating, and there's this heightened kind of emotional, warm kind of fuzzies and everything. And dating to engagement to even early marriage, there's that heightened in an awesome and beneficial way, particularly for the way that marriage works in our culture. There is that affection, that warmth that kind of is peaked. But after a while, that changes, and over the course of years, those same kinds of heights of emotional elation at just being near somebody or rubbing shoulder, whatever that dissipates. That doesn't mean that you've lost love, because what happens in good relationships is that becomes a deeper rooted, grounded, and fuller emotional warmth. That's not that peaked heat necessarily of initial infatuation, but it is that abiding warmth of knowledge and relationship. And again, so if we want to think about heart when it comes to our culture, think about love in that way. I would compare it more to you ever seen I think it's the movie Up? The two characters are together, and then they live all their years, and then he's a grumpy old man by himself. But before that happens, they have the years of these two older people together who love one another, whose lives are knit together. That's the picture of maybe love. We want to think about emotional love in that context rather than the emotional dating, infatuation love that our culture so esteems. So all that to say is that love is not primarily an emotion that drives our faithfulness in Christ, but it is the emotion that comes along with that deepened relationship and knowledge of and walking with Christ that gets richer by the year that we're walking with him. So again, if the heart is the center of your activity, moral, intellectual, religious, all that you are, what are some other ways that this trust would be displayed in life? We talked about kind of the house analogy. We talked about, again, it's a restatement or an allusion to the Shema, the great command. What are some ways this trusting in God with all your heart would come out in life? Any thoughts? Maybe it's easier to answer that question when we compare it with the second part. He says, do not lean on your own understanding. What are some ways in which, I believe this might be the next question, actually. No. We'll stay with this one. What are some ways in which this contrast of trusting in God with all our heart and contrast to leaning on your own understanding, how does that help us to see what that looks like, what that would manifest as? Any thoughts? Stephanie?
We see the urgency of learning to trust God more profoundly when life is hard. And we don't particularly understand why the difficulties.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Phil? Would you, since you turned there, read also verses 5, 6, and 7 of Psalm 37?
Commit your way to the Lord. Trust also in him, and he will do it. He will bring forth your righteousness as the light and your judgment as the noonday. Rest in the Lord and wait patiently for him. Do not fret because of him who prospers in his way, because of the man who carries out wickedness.
So rest in the Lord and wait patiently. Do not fret because of him who prospers in his way. How could maybe that verse help us to think about the idea of trusting the Lord and not leaning on your own understanding? Somebody's getting ahead, doing it a different way. I see how they're doing it. I could do the same thing. It's cutting corners. It's whatever it might be. It's not technically illegal or whatever it might be, you know. That is a real life situation where trusting in the Lord, obedience to him, or as it says later on, and turning away from evil comes to bear.
I think sometimes we think we are making the right decision, which is might not be. We'll let look out and look at it.
The more I think about this, Tom, I think you hit the nail on the head there. And I think that it is difficult in the moment, oftentimes, to discern, depending upon the situation, whether I'm trusting in the Lord and following his commands or leaning on my own intuition, gut instincts, and doing whatever, that I might have a feeling or whatever to do. I think we can so easily fall, and it's hard to see that in the moment.
I think sometimes we advantage.
Yeah.
If I can say that. Can I say that?
I think as long as the one of
Is it all right if I say that?
I think the same thing can be said for both. I think sometimes the general makeup of your own personality as a man or one of the ladies as a woman, there are going to be things that are going to get in the way of doing things in the way that God has required. Or, because whether that's the way I was taught when I was a kid, or that's where our culture responds, whatever else, that we have to be careful that we don't just follow in those things. And again, I think it can be unintentional. That's when I think retrospective kind of analysis and being humble to say, man, I did blow that. I did act in a way that didn't blow up in my face necessarily, but it wasn't the way that I should have acted. I think that we need to be able to do that as we walk through life. Psalm 62:10 says, "Do not trust in oppression, and do not vainly hope in robbery. If riches increase, do not set your heart upon them." Again, this idea of we can so easily be lured into false lines of thought because there's some desired gain at the end of it. We see the rich, we see the wicked prosper, we see whatever it might be, and we can kind of unintentionally start to move our thinking off of the right foundation. Can I get a volunteer to read Psalm 118, verses 8 and 9? A new volunteer. So Lauren and Elijah and Elizabeth and Isaiah cannot read this one. Stephanie, we'll get you in a second, Braden. Psalm 118, verses 8 and 9.
It is better to take refuge in Yahweh than to trust in man. It is better to take refuge in Yahweh than to trust in nobles.
Okay, again, this is restating the same idea, trusting in God versus trusting in, here it's not leaning on your own understanding, but on other people or on princes, on other forms of hope or refuge. Psalm 146, Do not trust in princes, in mortal men, in whom there is no salvation. His spirit departs, he returns to the earth, and that very day his thoughts perish. How blessed is he whose help is the God of Jacob, whose hope is in the Lord his God. Again, there is this constant encouragement, or constant, that's probably too strong, a repeated antiphonal kind of repetition of trusting in God, not in men, not in the things of your own heart, of your own mind, of others around you, in gold, and all those kinds of things. Turn to Jeremiah chapter 17. We'll come back to Proverbs, so don't lose your place there. Jeremiah 17, one of my favorite verses here. And actually, as I was reading through, working on this for today, I was looking at a lot of the cross-references I wanted to have in our study tonight. And so many of the ones that speak about trusting the Lord, I have been kind of my heart's song in the past year that I've been reading and meditating on and trying to memorize. Here's one of them. We can start with 7 and 8 and then read verses 9 and 10. So I would like to maybe have new volunteers here. Let's get some teenagers here. Volunteer for Jeremiah 17, 7 and 8. Someone want to volunteer for that one? Brendan, I love it. 7 and 8. And then we'll have, who's a senior here? Who's a senior? Oh, Hannah, you're right there. And next is a senior in the back row there. So Hannah, you're going to read verses 9 and 10. So Brendan, could you read Jeremiah 17, 7 and 8 for us?
Blessed is the man who trusts in the Lord, whose trust is the Lord. For he will be like a tree planted by the water that extends its roots by a stream. It will not fear when the heat comes, for its leaves will be green, and it will not be anxious to the earth drought, nor cease to work.
Now, before Hannah reads, Brendan, very well, thank you. Two things. Notice verse 7. There's a distinction in the two stanzas, or the two parts of that verse. Blessed is the man who trusts in the Lord and whose trust is the Lord. Boy, I love how that is stated. I'm not just hoping in God, but I know the God who is my trust, who is my hope. I love that. But verse 8, the tree planted by the water, extending its roots by the stream, did this tickle your mind at all? I was like, oh, that sounds familiar a little bit. Any thoughts? Okay, not your hair, Tom. Well, the very smooth scalp. Did it scratch your? No, but did anything kind of bounce around there, and you're like, oh, that sounds familiar? Where would we have heard that before? Elsewhere? Anybody? Psalm 1. His delight is in the law of the Lord. His law he meditates day and night. He'd be like a tree planted. Beautiful. And just look at the agricultural picture. He extends his roots by the stream. He's going to always have his thirst, his needs met. He's not going to be thirsty, which comes into view here when he doesn't fear when the heat comes. Why? He's got plenty of water. But his leaves will always be green even when it's hot outside or in a drought. Why? He's got that root into the stream, and he will not cease to yield fruit even in times of drought. Boy, what a great picture of one whose trust is in the Lord. Now, remember that the two parts of Proverbs 3 verse 5 is trust in the Lord and do not lean on your own understanding. Okay, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Well, let's think about also, for our heart's not in trusting the Lord, what does verses 9 and 10 say about our heart there, Hannah?
The heart is more deceitful than all else, and is desperately sick. Who can understand it? I, the Lord, search the heart. I test the mind, even to give to each man according to his ways, according to the results of his deeds.
Good. Anyone talk to somebody at school or at work, and you're talking about religion, you're talking about whatever, and someone say, or that somebody did something bad. Well, hey, God knows my heart. He knows my heart. Well, yes, he does. What does he know about your heart is the question. Is that a good thing or a terrifying thing? Answer, that's terrifying that he knows your heart. I mean, believers, the Lord knows our hearts, and we know that our hearts are not clean. I mean, objectively justified clean, but as far as experientially, we still have a lot of sin in our hearts. So again, blessed is the man who trusts in the Lord and whose trust is the Lord. Again, not trusting, not leaning on his own understanding, not going where his emotions or his whatever takes him, but he trusts in the Lord. Proverbs 28, 25, and 26 says, an arrogant man stirs up strife, but he who trusts in the Lord will prosper. He who trusts in his own heart is a fool, but he who walks wisely will be delivered. Again, the contrast between trusting in God and trusting in your own heart, your own inclinations, your own path. Next question, I believe, here, turning back to Proverbs chapter 3 here. The next question, the first line of Proverbs 6, I think restates the same principle of the first line of Proverbs 5. In all your ways acknowledge him, I think restates, trust in the Lord with all your heart. What dimension is added to trusting God with all your heart with the phrase, in all your ways acknowledge him? How does that broaden? Or maybe how does that, in certain areas, focus what it looks like and means to, in all your ways, acknowledge him? And just as you're thinking through this, the language for acknowledge, it's not merely, it's not just a mental, oh yeah, I get that, like a ticking off of a list. The idea is more in the idea of to know, in other words, to recognize the Lord's rights and authority. So acknowledge isn't just to say, like the wave, you acknowledge the police officers as you drive by. Well, I suppose you may be recognizing his authority at that when you're doing that too. But it's more than just that kind of a wave. It's the acknowledging is the recognition, the putting under yourself under, recognizing his authority in all things. So with that idea, what it means to acknowledge him, how does this, or maybe add a dimension to the picture of trusting in God with all your heart? How does that maybe help to clarify that, broaden that, sharpen that picture? That's what I want, sharpen the picture. Stephanie.
I think of James 1, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God. And in all your ways acknowledge him, know him, and he will make your path straight. So you're questioning which he's going to direct your path.
Okay. Good. Marianne? So how do we acknowledge the Lord in, okay, let's take it in some particular ways. All of our ways, that's our question, but what are some ways in some of the things we do that we can acknowledge him? So instead of taking all your ways, acknowledge him, okay, let's take here's one thing. When I drive in my car, or when I talk with my neighbor, when I go to work, when I watch TV, when I whatever. In some of these things, what does it look like to acknowledge him when I do those things? So you can come up with anything that you're doing is fine. What are some ways that how it would look like to acknowledge him? Any thoughts?
In the work that he has given me to do
Okay.
And when I'm not, confess that.
Okay. So tell me if I'm restating this in a way that of what you're saying. Have an intentional mindset of submitting to and honoring God in the mundane or the regular activities of life so as to do them to honor him in those things. Is that okay? How can we acknowledge God when we play floor hockey out in the garage? What in those ways? What are some of the ways that we can acknowledge him? Again, recognizing who he is, recognizing his authority and his, what was the language I had there? Recognizing his Lord, his rights and authority in those in that area. Braden, what do you think?
Well, I'm thinking of, when we're playing floor hockey, I just thought about God, how lucky we are to be here, and away how do we have sticks to be able to play or be here?
Okay, so one of the ways is to be thankful for the things that we have, and how might that, Braden? Let's go with that. How might it look if you know that you're thankful to God for the sometimes the not still in perfect shape stick that you have? How would you behave? How would you act in a way that says, "I am thankful for this stick"?
Well, I'm thinking of it anyway.
Would you start bashing it on the ground and hitting the wall?
No.
Why not?
Because I'd be wise to not to hit it, but also to keep it away from the wall so I can hit a ball.
Okay, that's good. I appreciate the focus on the game. Good. But the idea is being thankful for what you have, taking care of those things, is a way to show God that you're kind of acknowledging that, hey, he's given these things. Hey, practical examples. Good job. Evan, yes. Ultimately, it doesn't matter if you win or lose. Do you like to win, Evan? Do you like to lose? But ultimately, how you win or how you lose, you can acknowledge and recognize and submit to God's authority and lose in a way that glorifies God, or win in a way that glorifies God. Or you can win in a way that glorifies you, or lose in a way that glorifies you. Right? So these are, again, talking specifics. Being a sore loser is not a way that honors God in sports. So I think, again, that's just a specific thing, one of the specific ways that we can acknowledge him. And he will make your paths straight. The second half of verse 6. Again, the idea of smooth paths. Okay, so we have to take verse 5 and verse 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Don't lean on your own understanding. Acknowledge him on all that you do, and he will make your paths straight. The idea is, this is a kind of a summary benefit here. He's going to lead you on that level path. The idea there is smooth, straight. It's think of not necessarily, there's no twists and turns to it, but think of a smooth walking path versus a lot of herky-jerky, a lot of tumbled ground that's harder on the ankles or whatever else might be, or tripping hazards. It's a straight, smooth path. Look at verse 7. It says, "Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and turn away from evil." What does it mean to be wise in your own eyes? How would you maybe go ahead?
Issue of pride and humility. In Romans it says, "Do not think more highly of yourself than you ought to think, but think so as to have sound judgment." So I think the emphasis there is humility and meekness towards God.
Yeah. Be humble before God, not puffed up. Okay, good. Somebody else? Sherry. Yeah. Paul in 1 Corinthians or 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 12 says this, and this is you'll get why I'm quoting this verse here. He says, "For we," Paul speaking about him and his companions, "are not bold to class or compare ourselves with some of those who commend themselves, but when they measure themselves by themselves and compare themselves with themselves, they are without understanding." Paul's saying, essentially, if you judge yourself by your own little group, you have no concept of actually how you are doing or what's going on. It's a really bad way to do it. You're kind of building yourself up and making your own group, your own little standard, that which everyone is measured by. Can you think of any areas or situations that you either have gone through or worked with others who've gone through where Christians struggle with the reality that they're being wise in their own eyes, or you're being wise in your own eyes, and you're unwilling to, or the person is unwilling to submit to, humble themselves before the mighty hand of God, but rather do their own thing, think of their own ideas more haughty? I have one. I've had the benefit of being able to talk to several, at different times in life, several different couples, boyfriend, girlfriend couples, and who were getting serious when one was a Christian and one was not. Or one was a Christian in name only, and the other was at least trying to strive to live godly. And when they want to get married, the answer is you should not marry someone who's not a believer. But almost always what the response is, but. That's a way that we can essentially be wiser in our, well, no, what I want is better. What I want is the right thing. Now, can God make bless? Can he still use and bless things that are like relationships that aren't started properly? Well, of course he can. But that's an example that is all too common, I think, where you justify dating an unbeliever or getting dating someone who believes in false doctrine. Well, but the heart wants what the heart wants. It's one of those areas, not the only area, but we can do that. Or sometimes we can maybe feel morally justified in doing maybe not evil things, but not the perfectly right things because, well, so-and-so did it and got away with it, or so-and-so did it and they're not enforcing that rule, so it's not a problem, those kinds of things. You can kind of have those to get ahead. You can have those kinds of, everyone else is doing it and getting away with it. It's not really that big of a deal. You can justify those kinds of things when the answer ought to be fear the Lord and turn away from evil. Now, according to Proverbs 3, verses 6 and 8, what are a few of the positive blessings from the Lord that come from heeding his instructions? There are a couple here found in verses 6 and verse 8. Well, there should be three there. What's one of the positive blessings that comes from heeding the instructions of the Lord in these verses? Sherry, what's one of them? Direct your paths, okay. Somebody else? Phil?
Healing to the body.
Healing to the body, and someone else? Refreshment to your bones. We want to be careful that we don't fall into the ditch of the health, wealth, and prosperity types of people who say that if you're obedient, you'll never be sick, you'll always have money in the bank account. I mean, look, it says your barns will be full. The principle is that honoring the Lord in all that, striving to honor God with your heart in all that you do, and not leaning on your own understanding and turning away from evil and doing good, the principle is that there's going to be blessing both on your heart, your mind, and your vocation. Think about a clear conscience and the benefits of a clear conscience when it's time to go to bed. Think about the consequences of like dreading being found out, or whatever it might be, when it's time to go to bed. There is tangible benefits to trusting in the Lord, to obeying his commands, to fearing the Lord and turning away from evil, because you still may have difficult situations, but you're not going to heap on burdens and anxieties and concerns on top of concerns because of sinful activities. Again, that doesn't mean that honoring the Lord in your life, you'll never be in a dry point where you're going to need healing in your body or refreshment to your bones, or where there's going to be you're stretched out, you're worn down, where you need a time of refreshment. That, of course, that can for sure happen. But David said in the Psalms, when he was in sin and denying what he'd done, his body groaned even. There is this toll that sin takes upon the body. And very simply, what's one of the things, if you are engaging in a prolonged dalliance with sin, with whatever it might be, pride, lust, greed, whatever it is. David was lust, pride, greed, murder, all this stuff, right? You're tamping, you're kind of trying to keep those things hidden instead of this air of whatever. One of the things you're probably not going to do very well or very much at all is pray to the Lord. And open, honest intercession before him. What that means is your fears, you're not going to be going to the Lord with your fears. Your anxieties, you're not going to be casting your anxieties upon him, and you're going to be holding all of those. That is just toxic to your own emotional, mental, spiritual well-being. So trusting in the Lord, it doesn't cure every mental, emotional difficulty, but boy, trusting in your own, or leaning on your own understanding will complicate and compound those things, because you're probably not striving to cast all your cares upon him. When I'm afraid, I will trust in you, in God whose word I praise. I will put my trust. What can man do to me? Those are the things that maybe aren't going on when I'm leaning on my own understanding. When I'm not turning away from evil, I'm not going to be enjoying those tangible benefits. Proverbs 4, I'll end with this, verses 20 and 23, 20 to 23, it says this. My son, give attention to my words. Incline your ear to my saying. Do not let them depart from your sight. Keep them in the midst of your heart, for they are life to those who find them, and health to all their body. Watch over your heart with all diligence, for from it flow the springs of life. There is tangible benefits. Again, there's a tangible benefit to having a clean conscience when you go to bed, and to having an open line of communication for those fears and anxieties, and all the things that you have that we deal with, that you close off when you do not turn away from evil, when you trust in your own mind instead of leaning upon the Lord. Well, let me close this in prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for tonight that we can be together. Lord, bless those who are sick tonight. Help them to heal and recover. And Lord, may you be honored in our time of fellowship now, and may we honor you in our work and our school the rest of the week. In Christ's name.